journey begins. It was the first time I'd come to an end of the year with moolah in the bank. I was feeling pretty good about my progress, and I was looking for a way to take things to the next level. The way I usually level up is by finding new mentors. I looked around and I saw this guy who seemed to have everything I wanted. He had a beautiful family, a thriving business, and a great team of people surrounding him. I thought, I want to be like this guy. So when the opportunity came up to work with him, I jumped on board. It was scary because working with him was one of the biggest single investments I had ever made in myself. But if you don't take big risks, you won't get big rewards. So I signed a 5-figure contract to be in the guy's mastermind. When I pitched the idea to Cupcake, I softened the blow by telling her each retreat would be like a mini vacation for us. Plus, we had family in the area, so we would get to spend lots of time with them too. She reluctantly got on board, and we began this new leg of our journey together. I've talked about this in other episodes, but the idea here is that you have to do things that scare you if you want to grow. If it weren't for joining this high-priced mastermind, I would have never launched the Podcast Factory. One of the scariest things about podcasting. There are a lot of things that can scare you about podcasting. There's the tech stuff, the time commitment, the fear of no one listening to your show. But one thing that I hear from new clients all the time is, what will I talk about for 20 minutes each week? They're afraid they won't know what to say. They'll run out of things to talk about. They will be boring. And if you jump into podcasting without a plan like most people do, then you're almost guaranteed to have a lame show that runs out of topics and bores the hell out of your listeners. But worry not, my friends. Daddy is here to help you use what you've got to be more interesting and never run out of ideas. Never be bored, and you'll never be boring. That's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. If you've thought about podcasting, but you're deathly afraid of being boring and alienating your listeners, then you have to take a long, hard look at yourself. Are you bored often? If you are, then you will be a boring podcast host. 3 nails in a podcaster's coffin. Nail number 1. You want to know if your podcast is dead before it ever starts? I can tell pretty quickly. All I have to do is ask how you came up with the idea for your show. If you tell me it's something that you want to talk about, or it's an idea you have to share, I know you're in trouble. The fastest way to a crappy podcast is thinking about what you want. See, no one cares about you. They care about them. You want to be interesting? Talk about them and their problems, and you'll never be boring again. That's why you've got to do market research before starting your show. But this market research can open up another can of worms for you. Nail number 2. I see so many podcasts crash and burn because they make the mistake of providing too much information in their show. People don't want information. They want to be entertained. They live boring lives and they're looking for an escape. That's why it's your job to be interesting and distract them from their mundane lives. My friend Ben Settle calls this infotainment. And the idea is simple. You give people little bits of information wrapped up in big bits of entertainment, which keeps them engaged and listening. Nail number 3. The final nail in a podcaster's coffin is going to seem counterintuitive. Most people start their show to share their ideas with the world. Podcasting can definitely help you with that. But if you think once you've said something, you can't say it again, you are dead wrong. Fact is, you got to repeat your message over and over and over again for it to sink in. Just because you recorded a show on a topic doesn't mean you can't bring it back with a new angle or to go deeper. If you got something important to say, you have to say it more than once. Mind control. Back in 2000, a British mentalist popped on the scene with a new show called Derren Brown, Mind Control. He'd meet up with seemingly random people and read their minds. Sure, we've all seen this before. The difference with Mr. Brown is he would reveal how he implanted images into people's memories before he met up with them, by staging everything they saw. If you haven't seen his work, check him out on YouTube, Official Darren. Compare Mr. Brown's approach to those other suckers who ask a bunch of leading questions and try guessing what you're thinking. And it looks like amateur hour. And that's exactly what I see most people do when they get into podcasting. They start recording shows and guessing what people want instead of getting into their heads and knowing exactly what they want. Most people say they don't know where to start, or they don't have the time to do the research, or they already know their market, or they'd rather just riff. And in my accurate but not so humble opinion, that's a great way to have a podcast that no one cares about or wants to listen to. The average person is tuned into one radio station all day long. It's called WII-FM. WII-FM. What's in it for me? And if you're not connecting with what they want or need, they'll tune you out in a heartbeat. It's not because they don't like you. It's because you're boring. They don't care about you. They only care about them. Keep listening and I'll give you some real-world examples. Reading minds. For the first few years I was running my apartments, I did what I saw everyone else doing. I advertised how many bedrooms and baths, how many square feet, how much the rent was. My ads looked just like everyone else's. Therefore, I didn't get many calls and my apartments were half empty all the time. Why? Because all I was talking about was my apartment, not what was in it for my market. We didn't get too many phone calls back then, and I was the only one working there, so I did all the showings. Since we had so few showings, I was always excited to talk to people and find out what made them check us out. First question I always asked was, how'd you hear about us? In the beginning, most people came to us by word of mouth. They either knew someone who was living there, or they had lived there in the past. Luckily, we had a good reputation for taking care of our residents. That first bit of information helped me develop our referral program, where we made it easier for our residents to refer people and even rewarded them. This brought more people in, and within the first year, we increased our bottom line by 27%. All this extra activity got me more chances to talk to people. For that entire year, I heard stories about landlords who didn't make timely repairs, landlords who were always raising the rent, landlords who didn't screen tenants and let anyone live there, and landlords who would charge tons of money to move in. I made notes of these common complaints, and I began to formulate a plan. My marketing message was based on all this info. I wish I could say that I came up with all this at once, but it took almost 5 years of trying different things, tweaking, and figuring out what resonated with our ideal customers the most. First, I came up with the idea of the quietest, safest apartments in town. Lots of people liked this, and they started coming in. Then I came up with the idea of lightning approval, which meant you can get your apartment in as little as 2 visits. This appealed to the people who were always busy at work and didn't have a lot of spare time to go looking for an apartment. After that, we started the KYM program, which means keep your money. Instead of charging first month, last month, security, app fee, we didn't charge a security. And this got us lots of attention in our market, and the calls began pouring in. Soon after, we introduced rent lock protection, where your rent would stay the same as long as you renewed your lease before it expired. Before we knew it, we had renewals coming in all the time, and our apartments were full. To this day, we have a list of people who want to live there. What's this got to do with reading minds? We actually didn't read minds at all. We listened to our market, developed ideas that handled all their most burning objections, and then put those ideas out into the world. The effect to them was that we were reading their minds, but the reality was we had studied our market for years and addressed their issues before they came up, giving them the impression that we knew what they were thinking. Sort of like Darren Brown. Yeah, I know you were getting into that, but what kind of marketer would I be if I didn't make you an offer? So check this out. How would you like to spend more time with your family and less time on your business? Before anyone chooses to do business with you, they need to know one thing. Can I trust you? But building trust can take forever, and I know you don't have that kind of time. But What if there was a way to build trust in minutes instead of years? Would you want it? I know you would. So go grab yourself a copy of my Digital Daddies Toolkit. Inside, you'll get my top 3 speed influence tools to make you a trusted expert in any market fast. Go to daddiesworking.com/DDT to grab your copy today. Your mind control kit. Now that you know what it takes to read minds, I'm going to give you 2 tools I use to read and seemingly control my market's minds. The first is a list of questions I got from email copywriting legend, Mr. Ben Settle of bensettle.com. He calls it his prospect dossier. So it's got some of the normal questions like how old is your customer? Is your customer male or female? And then it gets into some weird stuff like what are they angry about and who are they angry at? Anyways, all 40 of them will be available over on the website. I'll give you the address in just a second. And I know you won't have all the answers to these questions at first, but the more time you spend talking to your market, the more intel you'll be able to gather from them. That's why a wise man once said, invest time each day talking to your market. The next part of your mind control kit is called the customer identity template. And I got this from Derek Halpern. He's the social triggers guy. It's part of his sales pages that converts program. And I've tried a lot of different ways to write sales letters, but the one that's worked best for me is Derek's program. And I don't even know if it's available anymore. You'll have to check with him. Please do not email me and ask me how to get it. Go get in touch with Derek. He's got everything broken down into manageable steps that are really easy to follow. And the part that I like best about his program is that it's not so much writing a sales letter as it is assembling one. By the time you get to the writing part, you already have everything you need to lay down some words and inspire emotion and action in your market. What you got to remember is people don't think rationally when making a buying decision. They think emotionally. By using the question from Ben Settle's prospect dossier, along with Derek's customer identity template, you'll be able to zero in on the emotion of your market and appear to be reading their minds. Just to give you an idea of what's on the customer identity template, it's number 1, problems and pains of your market. Number 2, opinions and beliefs. And number 3, goals and desires. Last but not least, hopes and fears. So these 2 tools, your mind control kit, is available to you at thepodcastfactory.com/DWP15. thepodcastfactory.com/D as in daddies, working podcast, DWP15. Have you ever worried about not knowing what to say on your podcast, running out of topics, or being boring? You do not have to give it another thought. Jump into your market, ask lots of questions, take notes, and get inside their heads. Use the prospect dossier along with the customer identity template I gave you, and you won't have to worry about this ever again. Your market will think you're reading their minds, and they'll always be interested in what you have to say and will not hesitate to take action on your offers. Eat your broccoli. Since Huddy's been home with us, we try to get him to eat good food. No matter what, the kid won't eat any vegetables. We try mashing them up. We try sneaking them in with other food. We've tried everything we could think of, and still he won't eat them. We've given him the nickname Junk Food Junkie because he'll eat chips and hot dogs nonstop while spitting out broccoli and other vegetables. It reminds me of the story I first heard from my friend Ben Settle. Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye in the hit TV show MASH, was asked why he thought his friend Don Hewitt's show 60 Minutes was so popular. Alda responded, "What they do is they give viewers a great tasting hot dog that nourishes them like broccoli." This is how El Bembo describes the idea of infotainment. It tastes like a hot dog, but nourishes like broccoli. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see so many podcasters make. They put out a show that's nothing but broccoli. They do everything they can to pack their show full of valuable information in hopes their listeners will swallow it up and get big and strong. What ends up happening is their listeners get bored, they don't like the taste, and they spit it out and go looking for hot dogs elsewhere. People don't want hardcore teaching. They get enough of that in school. They want to be entertained. If you can find a way to sneak in a little education with a heaping helping of entertainment, they're going to hang around a whole lot longer and ravish whatever you're cooking up for them. Here's why this is good for you. Most people are trying to cram everything they know into their free podcast show, stupidly thinking that giving all this value will somehow endear their listeners to them, when in fact it repels their listeners. Why? Because they're listening to your free podcast to be entertained, not educated. Plus, by putting all their best stuff into the free podcast, they're holding nothing back for their paid products and services. You want to stand out head and shoulders above your broccoli slinging competitors? All you have to do is tease out some valuable info on your show while still being entertaining. Then you can keep all your best hardcore teachings behind a paywall where people will have to whip out their credit card or give you their email address to get them. The beauty about this is you're not putting your best stuff out there in the open for everyone to see, and the people that take action on your offers are more qualified and motivated. A quick note about knowing your market. We've been talking a lot about getting inside your market's head. Once you get to know their fears, hopes, dreams, problems, and pains, it will make it a whole lot easier for you to find more customers just like them so you can help them too. Inside Podcast Mogul Volume 1, I give you a surefire way to clone your best customers, complete with scripts and everything. If you've already got the book, get to Chapter 7 and start reading. If you're new around here, and you don't have a copy of Podcast Mogul Volume 1, you can go to thepodcastfactory.com/Amazon and pick up your copy today. I said that already. Buddy's been with us for a couple years now. When we first brought him home, he didn't know a lick of English. But now he's starting to use all kinds of words. I'm just hoping that he doesn't continue picking up my favorite four-letter words and dropping them in church like he has before. Now, he didn't pick up these words right away. We invested a bunch of time repeating words over and over again so they'd sink in, and he knows what they mean and how to use them. Your listeners are no different. If you share your message just once, they'll forget it. You have to keep driving the point home, covering it from different angles, and repeating yourself until it finally sinks in. Once it does, you still have to keep repeating yourself so they don't forget it. This is one of the big mistakes I see podcasters make. They think by talking about a subject once, their listeners will remember it. You got to keep repeating yourself. Just because you talked about something one time doesn't mean you can't bring it back again and again and again. In fact, it's good to repeat yourself, especially about the things that are most important to you. This gives new listeners a chance to hear your thoughts on it and gives your old listeners a reminder. Plus, if you're passionate about your subject, one show alone won't do it justice. If you ever feel like you're running out of topics, you can bring back one of these subjects and hit it from a new angle. Another way to use this is to look back at your podcasting stats from your most downloaded shows, find what they have in common, and create new shows based on them. For instance, when I was working on Copy Chief Radio with Kevin Rogers, we looked at the stats and noticed that the shows we did with the words storytelling in the title got 33% more downloads than the other shows. What did we do? Recorded more shows based on storytellings, and our listeners thanked us as we got even more downloads talking about the same old stuff we already said. We covered a ton of ground today. I think I may have done too much hard teaching. I may have given you too much broccoli in this episode, but you should no longer be afraid of being boring or running out of things to say. Why? Because if you know your market, you're in tune with their hopes, desires, pains, and fears, then you can craft your show based on exactly what they want and need. But you got to be careful not to give too much information. It'll come off as boring and people tune you out. Instead, focus on giving people infotainment that tastes like a hot dog, but nourishes them like broccoli. Last but not least, you got to repeat yourself so your message sinks in with old listeners and indoctrinates new listeners into your way of thinking. If you follow these simple steps, you'll always be interesting to the people who tune into your show. Next time, we're going to talk about how you can leverage audio content to bring in hot leads into your data bank. Then I'm going to show you a simple way to turn audio into moolah. And after that, you'll see why you need to use audio content right now to increase your authority in the marketplace. That's all for today. Daddy's out.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.